The first alien civilization to detect the meridian was not a great empire or a powerful fleet. It was a small trade outpost run by the Drovathi Collective, an insectoid species with clicking mandibles and compound eyes the color of dark amber. Their outpost sat on a barren moon just 12 light hours from the quarantine perimeter, and it had been there for over a century, quietly processing cargo shipments and refueling merchant vessels. Nothing exciting ever happened there. The quarantine zone was dead space. Nobody came near it. Nobody had any reason to. So when the outpost's long-range sensors picked up a vessel moving at a speed and on a heading that should have been impossible, the duty officer, a young Drovathi named Chuck, stared at his console for a full minute before calling his commander. Outpost Commander Tyreth was old, cautious, and had spent most of his career avoiding surprises. When he saw the sensor data, his mandibles clicked rapidly, which, among the Drovathi, was the equivalent of a human going very, very pale. "That trajectory," he said, "it originates from inside the veil." "Yes, Commander," Chuck confirmed. "The vessel appears to have passed through the barrier." Tyreth said nothing for a long moment. Then he ordered every external antenna on the outpost to begin broadcasting a single message on every available frequency. The message, translated loosely, was one word repeated over and over: impossible. On the meridian, Sensor Officer Brooke Sinclair was the one who found the signal. She had been scanning the surrounding space since they had cleared the veil, mapping star systems, cataloging energy signatures, and looking for any sign of life. When the Drovathi broadcast hit her console, she almost knocked over her coffee. "Commander," she said, turning to Jake, "I have a signal. Artificial." Repeating, "Coming from a structure on a moon, about 11 light hours out." Jake leaned forward. "What does it say?" Brooke ran it through the translation matrix that Earth's linguists had been building for decades, assembled from fragments of alien communication, intercepted through the veil over the centuries. The matrix was rough, incomplete, and full of gaps, but it was enough. "One word," Brooke said, "impossible." Jake allowed himself a small smile. "Hail them back. Standard greeting. Let them know we come in peace, and we would like to talk." It took almost a full day before Tyreth agreed to respond. During that time, linguist Katie Dunn worked alongside Megan Hart to refine the translation protocols, pulling apart the Drovathi language structure, and building a pigeon communication bridge that was ugly but functional. Katie was a small woman with red hair and an almost supernatural patience for the impossible task of understanding how alien minds organized words and meaning. She had spent her entire career preparing for a conversation she never truly believed she would have. When Tyreth finally opened a direct channel, his first transmission was blunt. "You should not exist outside the veil. The barrier cannot be broken. No species in the recorded history of the galaxy has ever breached a council containment field. You are either a deception or an error." Jake responded himself, keeping his voice calm and even, the way he always did when things were most uncertain. "We are not a deception. We are humans from the planet Earth. We developed a technology that allowed us to pass through the barrier. We are here, and we would like to establish peaceful communication." Then Tyreth replied with something that Katie later described as the Drovathi equivalent of a whispered prayer. "Then the council must be told, and may the stars forgive us all." Word traveled fast. The Drovathi were a minor species in the grand structure of the Galactic Council, but they were well-connected traders with communication relays across dozens of systems. Within hours of Tyreth's report, the information had reached the Council's Central Intelligence Network. Within a day, it had spread to every major civilization in known space. Within a week, it was the only thing anyone was talking about. The quarantine species had escaped. Emergency sessions were called. Ambassadors who had not spoken to each other in decades were pulled into urgent consultations. Military commanders reviewed their fleet positions. Scientists argued about whether the veil could truly be breached, or whether this was some elaborate trick. And in the deep archives of the Council's historical records, clerks pulled out files that had not been opened in 300 years. Files about a small blue planet and the dangerous creatures that lived on it. On the Meridian, Communications Officer Ethan Marsh spent his days and nights intercepting the flood of encrypted transmissions bouncing between Council worlds. He could not decode most of them, but he could read the patterns, the frequency of messages, the urgency of the signals, the way certain channels that had been silent for years suddenly lit up with frantic activity. "They are talking about us constantly," Ethan told Jake during a briefing in the small wardroom behind the bridge. "Every major government, every military alliance, every scientific body, we are the only subject." "What is the tone?" Jake asked. Ethan hesitated. "Fear. Mostly fear. Some curiosity. A little anger. But underneath all of it, fear." He had expected this. Humanity had spent 3 centuries locked behind a barrier that the rest of the galaxy considered unbreakable. And now, without warning, without permission, they had walked right through it. To the Council, that was not just surprising, it was terrifying. Because if the veil could not hold them, then nothing could. Megan joined the conversation, pulling up a star chart on the wardroom's display screen. She had been mapping the nearby systems using the Meridian sensors, and the picture she painted was sobering. Within a 50 light-year radius of the quarantine zone, there were at least 9 inhabited systems, 3 major trade corridors, and 1 military staging area belonging to the Varathi Empire, the largest and most aggressive fleet power in the galaxy. Megan said, "We are not in empty space. We are in a crowded neighborhood. And every neighbor just found out that the locked door at the end of the street is open." Jake studied the chart. "Have any of them moved ships toward us?" "Not yet," Megan said, "but the Varathi staging area has increased its power output by 40% in the last 12 hours. They are warming up." Jake looked around the wardroom at his senior officers. Danny Cole, who had flown them through the veil with hands that barely shook. Brooke Sinclair, who had found the first alien signal. Katie Dunn, who had built a bridge of words between 2 species that had never spoken. Ethan Marsh, who listened to the fears of a galaxy and reported them without flinching. And Megan Hart, who had literally bent the laws of physics to set them free. "We are not going to run," Jake said quietly. "We did not come out here to hide. We came out here to be seen, so let them look." He straightened in his chair. "Ethan, open a channel. Broadcast on every frequency the Drovathi gave us. Address it to the Galactic Council directly." "What do you want to say?" Jake thought for a moment. Then he spoke, and Ethan transmitted every word. "This is Commander Jake Morrison of the United Earth Navy vessel Meridian. We have passed through the Veil Barrier. We are aware that our solar system was quarantined 300 years ago by the Galactic Council. We are not here to fight. We are not here to conquer. We are here because we believe that no species should be judged forever by its past. We request a formal audience with the Council to discuss peaceful integration into the galactic community. We will wait for your response." The message went out. It crossed light years and minutes, carried by relay stations that had never once transmitted a human voice. It reached trade hubs and military bases, and quiet research stations, and the great citadel of Accord itself, where the Council held its sessions. And across the galaxy, 400 civilizations heard a voice they had been told they would never hear, saying words they had never expected to receive. The humans were not just free, they were polite, and somehow that was the most unsettling thing of all. The Citadel of Accord was not a building. It was a moon. A hollow, artificial moon the size of a small planet, built thousands of years ago by a civilization that no longer existed, maintained now by the collective effort of the Galactic Council. It orbited a pale white star in a neutral system that belonged to no empire and no alliance. Inside it, carved from rock and metal and crystal, was the great amphitheater, a chamber so large that clouds sometimes formed near its ceiling, drifting between columns of stone that rose half a mile into the air. It was here that the full council assembled for the first time in 40 years. Over 600 representatives filled the amphitheater, seated or hovering or standing in sections designed for their particular biology. The Rithani sat in tall silver chairs, their long limbs folded with elegant precision. The Drovathi clicked softly in their insectoid clusters. The Varathi, massive and reptilian, occupied an entire wing of reinforced seating, their scales catching the light like dull bronze armor. There were crystalline beings from the Shen Nebula, who communicated through vibrations in their lattice structures. There were sentient gas clouds, held inside shimmering containment spheres. There were species with no name that could be spoken, only felt. And in the center of the amphitheater floor, standing on a circular platform designed for a single speaker, were 3 humans. Captain Jake Morrison wore his dress uniform, dark blue with silver trim, pressed and clean. He stood with his shoulders back and his hands at his sides, calm in the way that only someone who had already accepted every possible outcome could be calm. To his left stood Megan Hart, who carried a slim data tablet, and whose eyes moved constantly across the room, cataloging, analyzing, measuring. To his right stood Lisa Vance, the diplomatic attaché who had spent 20 years preparing for exactly this moment. Lisa was 43 years old, lean and precise in every movement. She had been a professor of xenopolitics at the Geneva Institute before the United Earth government had recruited her for the Meridian mission. She had studied every fragment of alien political structure, trade law, cultural custom, and diplomatic protocol that Earth's intelligence services had ever intercepted through the veil. She knew more about galactic civilization than any human alive, and she knew it was still not enough. But she also knew something else. She knew how to stand in a room full of people who were afraid of her, and make them listen. Ambassador Kale Zorath rose from his seat in the Rithani section. He was ancient now. His silver skin had faded to a dull gray, and his movements were slow and careful. But his voice, when he spoke, still filled the amphitheater without amplification, as if the room itself bent to carry his words. 300 cycles ago, this council sealed the solar system containing the planet Earth. The species known as humans was classified as Category 9 hostile primitive. Every metric of evaluation confirmed the assessment. They waged perpetual war upon themselves. They developed weapons of mass destruction and used them against civilian populations. They systematically destroyed the ecological systems of their own planet. The quarantine was necessary. It was unanimous. It was just. He paused, and his pale eyes settled on Jake. And now, against every prediction and every model, they stand before us. They have breached the veil, a containment technology that has held without failure for over 10,000 years. They have crossed into open space, and they have requested an audience. Another pause. I will allow them to speak, but I want this council to remember what they are. The amphitheater hummed with murmured agreement from dozens of species. Jake felt it in his chest, a low vibration of collective suspicion pressing against him from every direction. Lisa stepped forward. She did not raise her voice. She did not gesture, or perform, or plead. She spoke the way a person speaks when they know exactly what they are saying and why it matters. Ambassador Zorath, members of the Galactic Council. My name is Lisa Vance. I speak on behalf of the people of Earth and the United Earth government. She let the words settle. You quarantined our world 300 years ago. You had your reasons. We understand them. We have studied your transmissions, your histories, and your laws, and we know exactly what you saw when you looked at us. You saw violence. You saw destruction. You saw a species tearing itself apart. And you decided, reasonably, that we could not be trusted. She took a single step forward on the platform. You were not entirely wrong. 300 years ago, humanity was broken in many ways. We were divided, reckless, and dangerous, mostly to ourselves. But here is what you did not account for. You assumed that what we were was all we could ever be. You looked at our worst century and decided it defined us forever. She shook her head slowly. That was your mistake. The amphitheater was silent. Not the silence of agreement, but the silence of 600 beings holding their breath. In 300 years behind the veil, we did not collapse. We did not destroy ourselves. We did the opposite. We unified our planet under a single cooperative government. We solved our energy crisis through fusion technology and orbital solar collection. We reversed the worst of our ecological damage and restored 60% of our lost biodiversity. We developed medical science that doubled our average lifespan. We built artificial intelligence that serves as a partner, not a master. We constructed a fleet of starships capable of faster-than-light travel. And we developed the resonance drive, the technology that brought us through the veil. She paused again, letting the weight of the list settle over the room. We did all of this alone, without allies, without trade partners, without access to a single resource from beyond our solar system. Every civilization in this room had the benefit of galactic cooperation, shared technology, and mutual support. We had none of that. We had only ourselves, and a wall of energy reminding us every day that the universe had given up on us. Lisa looked directly at Zorath. Her voice did not waver. You did not quarantine a threat, Ambassador. You quarantined a species that was still growing. And growth, as any biologist in this room can tell you, is often painful and ugly before it becomes something worth admiring. She stepped back and folded her hands. We are not here to demand anything. We are not here to threaten anyone. We are here to ask, respectfully and clearly, for the opportunity to prove that we are not what we were. We ask for a seat at this table, not because we have earned it through power, but because we have earned it through change. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Jake had ever heard. It filled the amphitheater from floor to ceiling, pressing against the ancient stone walls. 600 representatives sat motionless. Even the gas clouds in their containment spheres had stopped swirling. Then, from the Varathi section, a deep voice rumbled across the chamber. It belonged to War General Drenok, a massive reptilian figure covered in battle scars, whose species had built the largest military fleet in the galaxy. Words, Drenok said. Pretty words from a pretty species. But words do not survive in vacuum. If the humans wish to sit among us, let them show us what they can do, not what they can say. A murmur of agreement rippled through the Varathi delegation and beyond. Several other militaristic species clicked or growled their support. Jake had expected this. He glanced at Lisa, who gave a small nod. Then he stepped forward on the platform and looked up at Drenok. Name the test, Jake said simply. Drenok bared his teeth, which among the Varathi was not a threat, but a sign of respect. A demonstration of capability, in open space, under council observation. You show us what your technology can do, and we will decide whether your words have weight. Jake held the war general's gaze for a long, steady moment. Then he nodded once. Agreed. The amphitheater erupted into noise, clicking, rumbling, whistling, vibrating, as 600 species began debating what they had just witnessed. But on the platform, the three humans stood quietly, shoulder to shoulder, and waited for the storm to pass. They had been waiting for 300 years. They could wait a little longer. The demonstration was arranged within 3 days. The Council moved faster than anyone on the Meridian had expected, which told Jake more about their anxiety than any intercepted transmission ever could. They were not just curious. They were desperate to measure the threat. The location chosen was a stretch of open space, roughly 200,000 kilometers from the citadel of Accord. A viewing platform, a flat, disc-shaped vessel the size of a sports stadium, was positioned at a safe distance, carrying representatives from every major Council species. Observation drones fanned out in a wide perimeter, their lenses recording from every angle. This would be watched live by billions across the galaxy. There would be no room for tricks or exaggeration. The Varathi provided the target, a decommissioned heavy cruiser called the Garathi Fang. 300 meters long, built from layered battle plating, and equipped with a full military-grade harmonic shield array. Drenok had insisted on this personally. If the humans wanted to impress the Council, they would do it against Varathi engineering, not some hollow training drone. Jake stood on the bridge of the Meridian, watching the cruiser drift in space through the forward view screen. It was an ugly ship, broad and angular, covered in the scars of old battles that had never been repaired. Its shields glowed faintly blue around the hull, humming with the same harmonic resonance technology that protected every warship, space station, and orbital defense network in the galaxy. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. Lisa, who had been in contact with the Council's arbitration committee, answered from the communications station. 1 hour. They want us to disable the cruiser using whatever means we choose. No destruction of the vessel. They want it intact enough to study afterward. Jake nodded and looked at engineer Aaron Webb, who was standing at the secondary systems console with a calm expression that did not match the enormity of what they were about to do. Aaron was 31, lean and quiet, the kind of man who thought in numbers and spoke in results. He had designed the disruption pulse system that the Meridian carried, and he understood it the way a painter understands color, not just the theory, but the feel of it. Beside Aaron stood weapons specialist Sam Bishop. Sam was the opposite of Aaron in almost every way, broad-shouldered, loud when off-duty, and possessed of an easy grin that made people underestimate him. But his hands were precise, his instincts were sharp, and when it came to targeting systems, there was nobody better on the ship. "Walk me through it one more time," Jake said. Aaron pulled up a schematic on his display. "Every energy shield in this galaxy is built on the same fundamental principle, harmonic resonance. The shield generators create a standing wave pattern that deflects kinetic and thermal energy. It is the backbone of galactic defense technology, has been for thousands of years." He tapped the screen. "The veil barrier that kept us locked in our solar system used the same principle, just scaled up to an almost unbelievable degree. When Megan figured out how to fold space through the veil, she had to map the resonance frequency of the barrier down to the subatomic level. Megan, seated at the science station, picked up the explanation without being asked. Once we understood the frequency structure of the veil, we realized it was not unique. Every harmonic shield operates on the same physics. Different frequencies, different scales, but the same underlying architecture. Which meant that if we could tune a pulse to match any given shield's frequency, we could pass right through it, Aaron clarified. Not break it, pass through it. The pulse does not overpower the shield. It simply treats the shield as if it is not there. It matches the frequency so perfectly that the shield cannot distinguish the pulse from itself. And once the pulse is inside the shield envelope, it disrupts every powered system on the target simultaneously. Brooke Sinclair, listening from the sensor station, let out a slow breath. "So you are telling me that their shields, every shield in the galaxy, are useless against us?" Aaron hesitated. "I would not say useless, I would say transparent." Jake let that word hang in the air for a moment. Then he turned to Sam. "How long from firing to effect?" Sam checked his console. "At this range, less than 2 seconds. 1 pulse, 1 shot. Everything goes dark." Jake looked at the view screen, at the Varathi cruiser drifting with its shields glowing, and beyond it, at the observation platform, where 600 species were watching and waiting to see what the locked-away humans could do. He understood the weight of this moment better than anyone on the bridge. This was not just a test of technology. It was a message. Every civilization in the galaxy relied on harmonic shields. Their ships, their stations, their planets, their entire way of life was built on the assumption that those shields could protect them. If the Meridian proved that assumption wrong, everything changed. Every military calculation, every defense strategy, every balance of power that had existed for millennia would shift in a single instant. And every species watching would understand immediately that the humans could not be stopped by force. Jake pressed the intercom. "All hands, this is Commander Morrison. We are about to conduct the demonstration. I want everyone to understand what is happening here. We are not showing off. We are not threatening anyone. We are proving that we belong out here. That is all." He paused. "Sam, when you are ready." Sam's fingers moved across his console. The Meridian's forward array powered up, not with the dramatic glow of a weapon charging, but with a soft, almost gentle hum. On his screen, the targeting system locked onto the Garathi Fang and began matching its shield frequency in real time, adjusting 1,000 times per second until the alignment was perfect. "Frequency matched," Sam said. "Disruption pulse is ready." "Fire," Jake said. Sam pressed the command. There was no beam of light, no explosion, no flash, no sound. The pulse was invisible, silent, and faster than anything the observation drones could track. It crossed the distance between the two ships in less than a heartbeat, passed through the Varathi cruiser's shields as if they were open air, and touched every powered system on the vessel at the same moment. The Garathi Fang went dark. Every light on the cruiser died. Every engine shut down. Every weapon powered off. The shield array collapsed. Navigation, life support, communications, sensors, all of it gone in one silent instant. The massive warship drifted, cold and lifeless, like a stone dropped in water. On the observation platform, 600 species watched in absolute silence. Then, the silence broke. The amphitheater erupted into noise, not cheering, not applause, but the raw, unfiltered sound of hundreds of civilizations realizing at the same moment that everything they knew about defense, about security, about power had just been rendered meaningless by a species they had locked in a cage 3 centuries ago. Drenok stood at the observation platform's forward rail, his massive clawed hands gripping the metal hard enough to bend it. He stared at the dead cruiser floating in space and said nothing. His aides spoke urgently around him, but he did not hear them. He was doing math in his head, calculating what this meant for his fleet, his empire, his species. The numbers were not kind. On the Meridian, Jake opened a channel to the Council's broadcast frequency. His voice was calm, steady, and carried no trace of arrogance. "This demonstration is complete. The Garathi Fang has been disabled. No damage has been done to the vessel's hull or structure. All systems can be restored with a standard reboot. We used a single pulse at minimal power." He let that last detail sink in. "We did not come here to fight, but we believe it is important that you understand our capabilities so that our request for peaceful dialogue is taken seriously." He closed the channel. In a private chamber aboard the Citadel, 2 hours later, Ambassador Zorath sat across a narrow table from Jake and Lisa. His ancient hands were folded in front of him, and for the first time since the humans had arrived, his composure was cracked. There was something in his pale eyes that Jake recognized. It was not anger or hatred. It was the look of someone who had been certain about something for 300 years and was now watching that certainty crumble. "You understand what you have shown them," Zorath said quietly. Lisa nodded. We do. Every shield in this galaxy, every defense network, every orbital station, all of it built on harmonic resonance. And you have just demonstrated to 400 civilizations that you can walk through all of it. We did not develop this technology to threaten anyone, Lisa said, her voice gentle but firm. We developed it to escape a cage. Zorath studied her face for a long time. And now that you are free? Lisa held his gaze. Now we would like to be neighbors. Zorath leaned back in his chair. He looked very old and very tired. Neighbors, he repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. Then he closed his eyes and let out a breath that seemed to carry 3 centuries of certainty out of his body. I suppose, he said, we do not have much choice. Jake shook his head. You do have a choice. That is the point. We could have come out of the veil with our weapons hot and our demands ready. We did not. We came with a request. That should tell you everything you need to know about who we are now. Zorath opened his eyes and looked at Jake with something that might, in another species, have been the beginning of respect. Perhaps, he said. Perhaps it does. The vote took 6 days. 6 days of arguments, counter-arguments, private meetings, shouted accusations, quiet negotiations, and long silences that stretched across the amphitheater like held breath. It was the longest and most contentious deliberation in the recorded history of the Galactic Council. And by the time it was over, friendships between species had been strained, alliances had been tested, and at least 2 minor delegations had threatened to walk out entirely. The question was simple. Should the quarantine on the human solar system be lifted? And should humanity be granted provisional membership in the Galactic Council? The answer, when it finally came, was 312 in favor, 89 opposed, and 21 abstaining. The quarantine was over. But the conditions were heavy. Human expansion was limited to 12 star systems, chosen by a joint committee. All military vessels were to be registered with the Council and tracked at all times. A permanent human diplomatic embassy would be established aboard the Citadel of Accord, staffed and maintained at human expense. Any violation of these terms would result in immediate suspension of membership and potential reimposition of the veil. Lisa Vance read the conditions aloud to Jake in the small wardroom of the Meridian. When she finished, she set the data tablet down and looked at him. It is restrictive, she said. 12 systems is almost nothing compared to what most Council species control. The military tracking is intrusive, and the threat of re-quarantine hangs over everything. Jake nodded. Accept all of it. Lisa raised an eyebrow. All of it? Without negotiation? Every word. Jake leaned forward. They are afraid. They saw what we can do, and they are afraid. These conditions are not punishment. They want to see if we can follow rules when we have the power to break them. They want to see if we meant what we said about being neighbors. Danny Cole, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, spoke up. And if they change the conditions later? Make them worse? Jake shrugged. Then we negotiate later, from a position of trust instead of fear. Right now, the most important thing we can do is exactly what they do not expect. Which is? Danny asked. Be patient. The Meridian made the journey back to Earth through the veil opening that the Council had now officially sanctioned. A permanent corridor through the barrier, maintained by Council engineers and monitored by a dozen species. As the ship passed through the gap and Earth came into view on the forward screen, blue and green and wrapped in white clouds, the bridge crew fell silent, the way they always did when they saw home. But this time, it was different. This time, they were not coming back to a cage. They were coming back to a door. The reception was unlike anything in human history. Every screen on the planet carried the live feed. Every city, every town, every village with a connection watched the Meridian descend through the atmosphere and land at the Geneva spaceport, where a crowd of over 200,000 people had gathered despite the cold February wind. Nathan Price, the United Earth Secretary General, stood on the steps of the Geneva Assembly Hall and addressed the global broadcast. He was a tall man in his 60s, soft-spoken and careful with his words, the kind of leader who had been chosen not for charisma, but for steadiness. For 300 years, he said, we lived behind a wall. We did not choose it. We did not ask for it, but we lived with it. And in that time, we became something that the rest of the galaxy did not expect. We became better. He paused and looked out at the crowd. Today, 42 men and women went out into a galaxy that feared us, and they answered that fear not with anger, but with openness. They showed the universe who we are now, and who we are now is something worth being. In the weeks and months that followed, the galaxy began to change. Human ships appeared at train stations and research outposts, and cultural exchange programs across known space. They came not as warships, but as cargo vessels, science frigates, medical transports, and diplomatic couriers. They were smaller than the great cruisers of the Varathi, and slower than the sleek racing ships of the Rithani, but they were everywhere, and they carried something that the galaxy had not expected: usefulness. Megan Hart led a joint research initiative with the Drovathi Collective on faster-than-light communication systems. The Drovathi had the theoretical framework, but lacked the engineering precision to make it work reliably. Megan's team provided that precision, working alongside clicking insectoid scientists in laboratories that smelled of copper and warm resin. And within 4 months, they had built a prototype that reduced interstellar communication lag by 60%. The Drovathi were thrilled. They had been trying to solve that problem for 200 years. Katie Dunn established the first cross-species linguistics institute on a neutral station near the Shen Nebula. Within a year, she had recruited linguists from 11 different species and had begun building the most comprehensive translation database the galaxy had ever seen. Her work was painstaking, often frustrating, and occasionally hilarious. The Varathi language, she discovered, had no word for compromise, but 17 different words for victory. But it was already breaking down communication barriers that had existed for centuries. Aaron Webb became the most requested engineer in the galaxy. A dozen civilizations invited him to consult on their energy infrastructure, and he accepted as many as he could, traveling from system to system with a small team of human engineers, upgrading power grids and reactor designs with a quiet efficiency that left his alien colleagues both grateful and slightly unnerved. He never shared the resonance pulse technology. That remained classified. But everything else he gave freely, because he understood that generosity was the fastest way to build trust. Sam Bishop, to everyone's surprise, retired from active service and opened a training academy on one of the 12 human claim systems, teaching advanced tactical theory to mixed species classes. His students included young Varathi warriors, Drovathi navigators, and even a few Rithani diplomats who wanted to understand military thinking. Sam taught them all with the same blunt honesty and easy grin, and his academy became one of the most popular institutions in the sector within its first year. Ethan Marsh stayed aboard the Citadel as the head of the new Human Diplomatic Communications Office. He spent his days listening, not just to official transmissions, but to the quiet conversations between species, the informal channels where real opinions lived. He learned which civilizations were warming to humanity, which were still suspicious, and which were quietly studying human technology with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He reported everything back to Earth with the same steady professionalism he had shown on the bridge of the Meridian. She requested and received command of a small survey vessel, the Larkspur, and spent her time mapping uncharted systems at the edges of known space, cataloging planets and moons and asteroid fields that no one had ever bothered to visit. She sent back reports that were part science, part poetry, describing sunsets on methane worlds and the sound of solar winds passing through rings of ice. Her reports became unexpectedly popular across the galaxy, shared and translated by species who had long since stopped seeing the universe as anything but mapped and known. But the moment that came to define the new era happened quietly, without ceremony, on a small observation deck aboard the Citadel of Accord. Jake Morrison stood at the viewport, looking out at the stars. He had been offered a promotion, a desk, a title, and a residence on Earth. He preferred the Citadel, preferred being close to the work that still needed doing, preferred standing at the edge of things and watching them grow. Ambassador Zorath found him there, as he often did in the evenings. The old Rithani moved slowly now, his silver-gray skin paper-thin, his steps careful. But his mind was still sharp, and his eyes still carried the weight of someone who had seen too much and forgotten none of it. They stood side by side for a while, watching a convoy of trade ships pass in the distance, their running lights blinking against the dark. "I owe your species an apology," Zorath said at last. His voice was quieter than it used to be. "I proposed the quarantine. I argued for it. I believe with absolute certainty that your kind would destroy yourselves or destroy others. I judged you by your worst instincts, and never once considered that those same instincts, that fire, that stubbornness, that refusal to accept things as they are, might drive you to be better." Jake said nothing for a moment. He watched the trade ships and thought about the veil, about the years behind it, about the generations of humans who had lived and died inside a cage of light and never stopped reaching for the stars. Then he smiled, just slightly. "That is the thing about humans," he said. "We are not defined by our worst days. We are defined by what we do after them." Zorath considered this for a long time. The stars turned slowly outside the viewport. A Drovathi freighter passed close enough for them to see its crew moving behind the portholes. "A dangerous philosophy," Zorath said. "But it got us here." They stood together in comfortable silence, an old alien and a young human, two representatives of civilizations that had been separated by fear and brought together by something neither of them had quite expected. Not power, not technology, not even diplomacy. Just the simple, stubborn willingness to try again. Outside the viewport, the galaxy stretched on in every direction, vast and bright and full of things that had not yet been discovered. For 300 years, humanity had looked at it through a wall of golden light and dreamed. Now the wall was gone, and the dream was just beginning. And somewhere, in the deep archives of the Citadel, a clerk quietly updated the file on the species known as humans. Where the old classification had read Category 9 Hostile Primitive, a new entry now stood in its place. It read simply, Provisional Member. Status, Active. Notes, observe closely. They are full of surprises. 300 years before the Meridian ever touched the stars, the Galactic Council made a decision that would echo across the ages. In a vast amphitheater, orbiting a dying red sun, over 400 species cast their vote in perfect agreement. The small blue planet on the outer arm of the Milky Way, the one its inhabitants called Earth, would be sealed away forever. A barrier of pure energy, known as the Veil, would wrap around the entire solar system like a cage of light. Nothing would get in, nothing would get out, and within a generation, most of the galaxy would forget the place had ever existed. The one who proposed it was Ambassador Kale Zorath of the Rithani Dominion. He was tall, silver-skinned, and spoke with a voice that carried weight even in silence. He had studied the humans for decades through long-range observation probes. He had watched their wars, their famines, their nuclear explosions, and their pollution. He had listened to their radio signals, full of anger and music and prayers and threats, all tangled together in a noise that no other species in the galaxy had ever produced. And when he stood before the council, he did not hesitate. "They are not like us," he told the assembly. "They are violent beyond reason. They split the atom and used it to kill their own children. They burn their own world for fuel. They fight wars over invisible lines drawn in dirt. If we allow them to reach the stars, they will bring that chaos with them. They will not stop. They do not know how to stop." No one argued. The vote passed. The veil went up, and Earth vanished from the galaxy's memory like a name erased from a page. But Earth did not vanish from itself. 3 centuries later, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the starship Meridian and stared at the veil through the forward view screen. It looked like a wall of pale gold light, stretching in every direction, shimmering faintly, curving away into infinity. He had seen it every day of his life, the same way his parents had, and their parents before them. Every human who had ever looked up at the night sky had seen the faint glow at the edge of their solar system and known what it meant. They were locked in. Jake was 38 years old, square-jawed, calm by nature, and stubborn by habit. He had joined the United Earth Navy at 18, climbed the ranks by being dependable rather than flashy, and had been chosen to command the Meridian, not because he was the best pilot or the most decorated officer, but because he was the kind of man who made good decisions when everything around him was falling apart. Beside him at the science station, Chief Science Officer Megan Hart was running the same calculations she had run 1,000 times before. She was younger than Jake by 5 years, with sharp dark eyes and a quiet intensity that made people nervous, until they realized it was just focus. She had spent 11 years of her life developing the resonance drive, a technology that did not push a ship through space in the traditional sense, but instead folded the fabric of space itself, layer over layer, allowing the ship to slip between the folds. It was the most advanced piece of engineering humanity had ever created, and it had been built for one single purpose: to get through the veil. "Resonance field is holding steady," Megan said without looking up. "We have a window. I estimate 60 seconds, possibly less, before the barrier compensates." Jake nodded. He turned and looked at the crew behind him. There were 42 of them, men and women from every corner of Earth, each one a volunteer. Navigator Danny Cole sat at the helm, his hands hovering over the controls, his face pale, but his jaw set. Communications Officer Ethan Marsh was monitoring frequencies, his headset half on, his eyes locked on Jake. Sensor Officer Brooke Sinclair watched her screens with the careful stillness of someone waiting for an earthquake. None of them spoke. The bridge was silent, except for the low hum of the engines and the soft pulse of the resonance drive warming up. Jake had given the big speech hours ago, back when they were still in Earth orbit, before they had made the long burnout to the edge of the solar system. He had told them the truth. He told them that no one knew what was on the other side. He told them that the barrier might destroy the ship. He told them that even if they made it through, the galaxy beyond might be hostile, empty, or simply indifferent to their existence. He told them that Earth was watching, that 8 billion people were holding their breath, and then he told them the only thing that really mattered. "We've been in a cage for 300 years. Every generation has looked at that wall and wondered what's on the other side. Today, we stop wondering." Now, sitting in the command chair with the veil filling the view screen, Jake felt the weight of those words. He felt the weight of every human who had ever lived and died inside this box of light. Every scientist who had tried and failed to crack the barrier. Every child who had asked their parents why the stars had edges. He took a breath. "Danny," he said, "take us through." Danny's hands moved. The Meridian surged forward, the resonance drive screamed to life, and the ship plunged into the barrier like a needle into silk. The view screen went white. The hull groaned. Every light on the bridge flickered. Megan gripped the edge of her console as the ship shuddered and twisted, caught between two states of space, folded and unfolded at the same time. Alarms blared. Someone behind Jake swore under their breath, and then it stopped. The view screen cleared. The alarms went silent. The lights came back on, steady and strong. Jake stared at what lay before them. Stars, thousands of them, millions of them, clean, bright, unfiltered, stretching out in every direction without end. No shimmer, no glow, no wall, just the raw, open, infinite universe, laid out before them like a gift. Brooke was the first to speak. Her voice cracked slightly. "We are through. All systems nominal. The veil is behind us." She paused and looked at Jake. "Sir, we are outside the barrier." Ethan pulled off his headset and stared at the view screen. Danny leaned back in his chair and let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. Megan closed her eyes for just a moment, and when she opened them, they were wet. Jake said nothing for a long time. He just looked at the stars. Then he pressed the ship-wide intercom. "This is Commander Morrison. We are through the veil. Repeat, we are through. For the first time in 300 years, a human ship is in open space." He paused. "Whatever comes next, remember this moment. We earned it." The bridge erupted. 42 voices cheering, laughing, some of them crying, the sound bouncing off the middle walls and filling every corridor of the ship. It was not the sound of soldiers or scientists. It was the sound of people who had just walked out of a prison they had been born inside. Behind them, the veil shimmered on, unchanged and unbroken, as if nothing had happened at all. But something had. Everything had. And the galaxy, whether it knew it yet or not, was about to find out.